This podcast is being recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their ongoing connection to land, waters, and culture. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was, and always will be, Aboriginal land. Welcome to The Least We Can Do, a podcast about the housing system, what's wrong with it, and what you can do about it. I'm Hugh.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Michelle. Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about intersectionality, and I'm hoping that this is going to link together all of the episodes that we've already recorded, just to bring together a couple of points we've already mentioned. We were going to talk about intersectionality, but also talking about some individual action at the end.
Ooh.
So hopefully that'll be helpful. First off, why are we talking about intersectionality? We've mentioned it before, but Pulse survey says that the youngest respondents are most likely to face large problem clusters. So we know that youth are highly impacted by housing precarity issues, and also that they are at higher odds of experiencing legal issues, but are the least likely to report or seek help with those issues. So we wanted to bring together an understanding of intersectionality for our listeners.
And that's Public Understanding of Law survey? That's what that was, yeah?
Yes,
yeah,
thank
that's
you.
okay. Pulse survey, like you're interviewing lentils.
Not quite, but that would be maybe next time.
Yeah,
next future project.
Yeah, next project.
That's it. So hopefully by bringing those things together, you'll have a bit more knowledge where to go from here. And I think we've had in our other episodes, we've spoken about what you can do for yourself, but broadening that a little bit also to what you can do as an individual to help others. So we've spoken about that a little bit before, but bringing that in as this is our last episode. So really bringing everything together.
For now.
For this iteration.
For this season.
That's it. So firstly, intersectionality. Do either of you want to give a crack at defining intersectionality?
That's like where you analyze how like roundabouts and crossroads work, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure that someone is studying that.
Yeah, it's called urban planning. I'm sorry. I'm that's a joke. That's me being deliberately facetious.
Wow, who would have thought? Chris, you...
Actually tell us what it actually is.
Well, my understanding of it, I might be wrong, but my understanding of it, like all my gist of it, is like trying to understand how people's like different identities and things intersect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's about talking about how those different factors come together to build an individual experience, which is going to be unique and different based on all of those factors, and that we're not really able to separate those out from our individual identity or experience.
That makes sense. I mean, because everyone's experiences are going to be subjective to what and who they are and how they see themselves, etc.
Exactly. And we've said in our other episodes that we're not experts on this field, and if you want specific information, you need to find it for your experience. And so we're giving you the tools here to identify those different elements and then what kind of service might be able to give you the best support possible.
But also that like it's very difficult to like disentangle individual identities. So like even if there's sort of a like single identity focused service, like I don't know, pulling an example off the top of my head, I don't mean to criticize them, but like the Women's Legal Service, for instance, that's like specifically focused on the experiences of women and non-binary people, but it's like those experiences even of being a woman are going to be coloured by race, going to be coloured by sexuality, things like that.
That's it. And that's exactly where the term comes from. So Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality because in a legal case, the factors will only be considered in one single lens. So it was about people making a claim as women but not factoring in their race as black women. So that's where all of this comes from initially. So we're going to listen to the experience of someone who's been summarised by their caseworker.
Mm-hmm.
We'll patch it in, but I'll just read it so that you understand what we're linking to. So we have supported a young client who is from a culturally linguistic diverse background. They work in retail and she's trying to leave her home where her dad is physically violent towards her. She's tried to find rentals but has no history, and also so many people apply for all the rentals and the rent costs are very expensive. She wants to go on the Victorian Housing Register for priority housing, but the wait time is currently 3 years.
Fuck me dead.
Yeah. So I think this is a really good example of where someone's individual experience is going to be shaped by all their different intersections, and it's going to change some of their experience. But also we've been talking, Chris, in your episodes about systems. So the priority housing wait is 3 years. So
It's insane, yeah.
yeah, so that's a really big system one that regardless of all your personal intersections, the system's really backlogged at the minute.
Yeah, so I mean, priorities are meant to be urgent as well, right? So like that's 3 years for an urgent housing. So you can imagine someone who's not in the priority like that would be a much longer wait as well. Yeah, if you don't qualify or meet their threshold for what urgency, is. Yeah,
Absolutely. And we spoke about that when getting support with in our episode about getting kicked out of your home, that you need to seek support as soon as possible because there is wait times like this in our system at the minute.
Yeah, and I mean that's for like priority list public housing, right? That's not like crisis accommodation necessarily.
No, I mean there are obviously
There are wait lists on
complexities
those,
and wait
yeah.
lists with those, but that's kind of outside of our scope. But
Yes.
I mean, hearing that story, like I think we can all agree that is certainly an urgent case and it should be prioritised.
Yeah, absolutely.
3 years doesn't sound like a prioritisation, really.
no, it doesn't.
Yeah. So we're not going to be able to talk about all intersections. That's a good example to point out a couple. But we're just going to try and talk about a couple and how they might intersect with housing specifically. And then hopefully give you some action points at the end for if you're experiencing housing issues in some of these where you might particularly seek support, as well as going to the general bodies we've spoken about.
Yeah.
So in terms of intersectionality and its things that are influencing housing, what would be some of the intersections you might think of?
Cut out this long break so we seem smarter.
Do you want me to just give them?
No, it's fine. Gender, for instance.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of, particularly in sort of the less formal rental market, right? In terms of like people looking for co-tenants, people doing sublets, whatever. There's a lot of like people being really specific about gender in those.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I have seen that. Actually, even like, and I've been even like just scrolling on Facebook to be like, I want a female like tenant only or something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, then also there's sort of a level of, I mean, perhaps I'm obviously not necessarily the best position to speak on it, but like, there's also like levels of vulnerability and questions of, motivations there, right?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, I'm not the best to speak on it, but you could definitely speculate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely been a lot of studies about what houselessness and homelessness looks like now, and Adkins calls this a new homelessness, which has meant that women's vulnerability and young people vulnerability has increased. And I think we've spoken about the different types of renting and where there's option, like more place for exploitation. And certainly people with different intersections are already at a higher risk of this. And then if they're in those more risky categories of renting, that just continues to escalate the risk factors for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And outside of gender, we've also heard from our case study about family violence. And so that's a really big intersection. And I know, Chris, you've mentioned this in a previous episode.
Yeah, well, it's the leading cause for youth homelessness. So yeah, I think it is a very big thing to focus on for sure, because
Yeah, absolutely. It's a quarter of people seeking homelessness services in 2023 to 4 stated family violence as the main reason for seeking housing. So that's from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. So certainly it's a really rising issue. I also recently did a course with Project Respect about people with experience in the sex industry, and that was really interesting to hear about how that is another intersection that I hadn't really considered before, that makes housing really complicated.
Yeah, definitely. Like I have friends in the industry who've like had serious issues. I mean, it's not like they're very neat, they're very organized, they're like model tenants. They've got decent incomes, right? But just because of the nature of their work, they had like real struggles trying to, because a lot of a lot of the requirements are sort of they're engineered around like acceptable sort of forms of employment. I mean, like, yeah, sex work's obviously a big one, and like to tie back to sort of previous talking about discrimination in housing and your legal avenues, should be like sex work is a protected characteristic now.
Yeah.
Working in the sex industry is not illegal and should not be discriminated against. But sex work and cash in hand work in general make like, and being in industries where you get paid a lot of cash, right? It's not just sex workers, although obviously that's a big part of it. Make it a lot more complicated to get rentals.
Yeah, that's it. Like there's so many other factors, even if there isn't discrimination against your job or you haven't mentioned it, to avoid that. You're not likely to have pay slips with all your income. That's often a requirement for rentals. It can be hard to explain what you do for work if you're trying to like avoid that discrimination. So there's a lot of factors with that.
Yeah.
And we've spoken so much about systems and the impact, and that's also part of it, that if you have all these other things that are going on, even if you're not directly discriminated against, maybe it's harder for you to do all of the steps you need just to apply for a rental.
Yeah, absolutely. And indirect discrimination is also illegal, but like proving it in a case like that is going to be very difficult.
It's, so complicated.
I mean, yeah, it's something that's very embedded in the system as well. So they're not. There's not a lot of motivation sometimes to sort of prove it as well.
It's like, okay, on the face of it, it seems perfectly reasonable to be like, give us your pay slips if you want, like, to rent this place, or like, tell us some details about your work. On the face of it, that's reasonable, big air quotes. But like in practice, that produces discriminatory outcomes.
That's it, exactly. Coming back to that, our favourite word, reasonable, and how we define that and how that's defined in our system. So absolutely. Are there any other intersections you can think of that might have an impact?
Age, right? Like that's the whole.
Yeah.
That's sort of the whole motivating factor of the podcast. Is like we're talking about youth as a category, like young people. Explicitly, their experience makes it more difficult to access housing. Their experiences, like, they have more issues when they do.
Yeah.
They're less likely to be able to get help or even to recognize that they're having legal issues. And that's why we're here, right?
Yeah, when it comes from the fact that a lot of the housing, industry is adult centric as well. It doesn't really.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of resources and things out there for youth. And even like the industry's understanding of the needs of youth is very poor as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we spoke about that a lot in your episodes as well. Absolutely, age is a big thing, and that's why we're focused on young people. But I would also like to mention that in a lot of our research, it was mentioned that older women who are going through divorce or separation is like the most fast growing.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, women over 55, I think it is. It's like the
Exactly.
fastest growing demographic of people experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, exactly. So not something we've got time to dive into in this, but we'll try and link a couple of resources as well for those people specifically, knowing that it's becoming such a big issue. I think also talking about youth and intersectionality and housing, we have to talk about mental distress and mental health, because that is such a big intersection that's entwined really for anyone and everyone in different ways. The Pulse survey again spoke about youth accessing support from launch housing, and in a 2-week period, 44% reported having current mental health issues. So if we factor in that was self-reporting, it's about half. So that's a significant impact, and that's an intersection that will impact what housing precarity is happening, but also those things like being able to seek support, knowing where to seek support, having that energy and time is a really big part of it as well.
Yeah, because like particularly if you're trying to protect your own rights, the thing about running cases, even like running something through VCAT, even though it's meant to be like informal and easily accessible, which, it does a better job of it than the courts, sure, but it involves paperwork, it involves organization, it involves deadlines that are pretty strict. You gotta be able to be on top of it. And if you're already experiencing like a lot of mental distress, or if you've got a mental illness that affects your ability to organize and budget time, that's going to be a barrier for you.
Exactly, yeah. There's so many ways that will have an impact on your experience. So definitely something that has to be factored into the bigger picture. I think also it would be good just to briefly talk about geography. So we've mentioned that because we're talking about youth, we do think that a lot of people accessing this podcast are probably going to be moving out of home for the first time. And there's a lot of factors that contribute to that. But those people who are moving from rural Victoria into the city, often this happens for youth because they're moving for study or opportunities.
Yeah.
So they're moving out of the parental home at the same time that they're moving into the city areas. They're much less likely, if you've moved from a rural area, you're much less likely to move back to your parental home.
Yeah.
Because we've built community and things here, which we've spoken about as well.
And also just because it's flatly more difficult, right?
Exactly. You're moving away from the reasons that you've moved here into the city. Obviously, that's your priority over living in the rural areas. And in general, it doesn't end with the first time you're moving out of the parental home. The issues in the city for housing precarity are much more prevalent than in the rural areas. So that's something also that we've got to consider in terms of how what the risk factors are, but also when we're supporting people, if they don't have that support network or they're still learning to build their community in the city, that then also has to be considered as part of the bigger picture. We also wanted to talk quickly about race, as Aboriginal Australians have additional barriers when it comes to housing, as well as the intersections with other factors from colonialism, so health issues, low income, complexities of government support. We don't have a lot of time to go specifically into that. I think with a lot of these things, we could talk for a whole episode on each one.
Yeah, we would probably want to be bringing on like a subject matter expert, right? Someone with lived experience.
Exactly. We can't provide all the specialists that we'd want to have these discussions, but particularly just wanted to shout out Aboriginal Housing Victoria, which we'll link in the notes. As we've been mentioning, the intersectionality and getting specific support is really important, so that's a really good resource to go to for people in that community. So hopefully that's kind of helped us imagine intersectionality, and maybe if you're listening, you've kind of clocked a few things that you would be in the group for or a part of your identity. I don't know about you two, but it's a bit depressing. It feels a bit hopeless. So we really wanted to collectively come together and talk about how this is going to help us and what steps we can take. Just to make sure that people aren't falling through the gaps because their intersectionality is not being considered or factored in. That's something that Kimberly Crenshaw specifically talks about, and we've spoken about it a lot through our episodes about tailored support and responses.
For sure, yeah. That was the biggest thing that a lot of the like the Youth Homelessness Assembly, like that's what they recommended, was focusing on certain typologies and things like that, so the different sets of intersectionality, as you're saying. So having tailor-made things for their own identities and their own experiences and issues, but also considering, as you said, the geography, the place-based things as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, I know, Hugh, you mentioned about making sure that you're accessing support so it can be tailored, because we don't know your specific experience. This is hopefully to educate people, but we need a bit more than that for case-by-case basis.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of support services out there. We don't have, we could spend a whole episode just running off names, not that it would stick in anyone's memory, right? But, there's a lot of more specific services, and there's sometimes, more specific project-type groups even embedded within generalist services. Off the top of my head, right, there's Fitzroy Legal Centre, which is a community legal centre, runs Q plus law specifically as a legal centre for queer people, for instance.
Amazing. Yeah.
So these kinds of intersectional specialist services are there, even if you do have to do a bit of digging to find them.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually did research as a team. Was there somewhere where you could kind of go to then find out what services are available to match different identities and experiences? It doesn't really exist, but there's just so many things, and without us being able to keep it up to date, we didn't want to create something that was immediately unhelpful. So we are going to include in the show notes as much as we can, but specifically encouraging you to look within your local area and local context for those services that are going to be as helpful and tailored as possible. I've done some research, obviously, and Adkins et al. Particularly talks about individuals building capacity for themselves where possible. Obviously, all of these intersections we've spoken about and the systems will have an impact on your ability to build capacity. But things like financial skills, access to counselling, help with communication barriers, including language, and just the kind of moral and mental support for like things where there's fear involved, like being evicted from your home, and managing all of those things. So building capacity when you can, even if you're not experiencing housing precarity in this moment, it's going to help you, and it'll also help the people around you in your circles as you work together to do those things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an activist saying that I've heard, it's like all we have is each other.
Yeah.
Right? Which obviously there's a lot of sort of services you can specifically access, but like even in general, just having like people in your networks that you can help and who can help you is going to be a huge part of being able to like engage with those services most effectively.
And I think that even that goes beyond just housing as well. I think that should be a general rule of life as well.
That's absolutely true in general, but like specifically with housing, like having the capacity, like even having like emotional support from your network because you're going through a difficult time is going to make it easier for you to like advocate for your own needs and to access this kinds of support you need.
Exactly. Having a collective voice and having community support is so integral. And so even if the things that we've spoken about in this podcast and this episode are not necessarily something you're experiencing, having that support and that knowledge for the people in your community is so important and beneficial. And it'll also help us take that changes that are a bit more impacting the system. So individuals can make that difference by doing these things and engaging with, I think we've already mentioned a couple of places that are always looking for volunteers for support, and that's all part of how we can make that change overall, and make sure that everyone's got tailored specific support, but also we're trying to make some changes so that there's less risk for everyone, particularly the people with lots of intersections which are impacting their experience. Is there anything else you can think of that might be helpful, tips and tricks to get involved and engaged in this issue as an individual?
Talk to your friends, be there for them.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing is
talk to your neighbors.
Yeah.
Hell. Especially if you happen to live in like an apartment block or something, right, where a lot of the people around you are going to be like, you're all going to have the same landlord, right? But even just in general, like talk to the people in your geographic area who might be outside your like friends circle.
Yeah.
Make connections, make social networks.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes, but do it anyway. It's scary sometimes, but do it scared.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's only going to build your capacity for the future no matter what
happens. The more you do it, the less scary it gets too, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you so much. That's what we wanted to chat about today. And again, we're going to put in the show notes ways that you can get engaged and get support for yourself or to support others. So head there if you wanted to explore further.
This has been The Least We Can Do. All the resources we've discussed in each episode are going to be linked in the show notes, so head on down there and take a look at those if you need to do some more reading. We'd like to thank everyone who's worked with us, particularly our media production team, and we'd like to thank you for listening.